Last Sunday, we told you about a WHO report that listed several chemicals as potentially cancer-causing.
The weed killer Roundup caused cancer.
Is there any sort of response to that? I mean, are we in fact poisoning our crops by using this Roundup?
Not at all.
It was marketed as safe, revolutionary, even harmless enough to drink. But behind the glossy commercials and billion-dollar ad campaigns, a different story was unfolding. One filled with boardroom strategies to dominate global agriculture, the quiet silencing of dissenting scientists, and the steady expansion of a chemicals reach from rural farms to urban gardens. Farmers were promised efficiency and higher yields, but what they weren't told was how deeply their soil, water, and crops would become dependent on this single product. Communities around the world unknowingly became part of a vast experiment, with no consent forms, no warnings, and no exit strategy. Every ad showed green fields and smiling families, but behind the scenes, legal teams and PR firms were working overtime to manage growing whispers about safety concerns, one that would lead to thousands of lawsuits, a global public health reckoning, and the fall of one of the most powerful agrochemical giants in history. This is the story of Roundup. This is the story of Monsanto. And this is how one chemical changed the fate of the world's food supply. In 1974, Monsanto introduced the world to glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. It was hailed as a miracle weed killer. Farmers loved it. Yields skyrocketed. Monsanto's stocks soared. It quickly became the go-to solution for both small farms and massive agricultural operations, marketed as the answer to stubborn weeds that had plagued growers for generations. With each passing year, glyphosate's reach extended, sprayed over millions of acres, drifting into waterways and settling into the soil. Entire farming systems were redesigned around its use, with genetically modified crops created specifically to survive its application. For Monsanto, this meant unprecedented market control. But for the environment, it meant a single chemical saturating landscapes across continents. Critics began to warn that such heavy reliance on one herbicide could have unintended consequences, not just for plant biodiversity, but for the health of every living thing that came in contact with it. But there was a catch. Glyphosate doesn't just kill weeds. Over time, concerns grew about what else it was doing to the soil, to ecosystems, and to our bodies. Independent studies began surfacing, showing links between glyphosate exposure and serious health problems, cancer, endocrine disruption, and birth defects. These findings came not from corporate-funded labs, but from independent researchers, doctors in rural communities, and epidemiologists studying long-term health trends. In towns surrounded by sprayed fields, rates of rare illnesses began climbing. Parents noticed children developing chronic conditions at unusually young ages. Farmers themselves, once Monsanto's most loyal customers, started to question whether the chemical they used daily was quietly eroding their own health. Yet when these studies made headlines, a swift and coordinated response followed. But Monsanto wasn't about to let science get in the way of profit. Whistleblowers, leaked emails, and internal memos began to paint a disturbing picture. Studies ghostwritten by Monsanto scientists, academics on corporate payrolls, regulators misled. Behind closed doors, executives mapped out strategies to control the narrative, pressuring journalists, funding counter-studies, and discrediting outspoken researchers. The goal wasn't to disprove the dangers, but to create just enough doubt to stall regulation. One email read, quote, "We have to be the ones who write it, and they will just sign their names." Then came the lawsuits. In 2018, a California jury awarded groundskeeper Dwayne Johnson $289 million after ruling that Roundup caused his terminal cancer. Johnson's case was a landmark moment, the first time a courtroom pulled back the curtain on decades of corporate misconduct. The trial revealed internal documents showing that Monsanto had known about glyphosate's risks for years, yet actively worked to discredit or bury any evidence that could threaten its market dominance. The emotional testimony of Johnson, who described the pain, suffering, and loss of quality of life caused by his illness, resonated far beyond the courtroom. It gave a face, a voice, and a human cost to the chemical debate. News outlets across the globe covered the verdict, sparking a wave of legal action from farmers, landscapers, and everyday consumers who believed they too had been harmed. Thousands of similar cases followed. Bayer, which bought Monsanto in 2018, inherited not just Roundup, but its legacy. Courtrooms filled with stories eerily similar to Johnson's. Ordinary people whose lives were upended by a product they had trusted for years. The company has now paid over $10 billion in settlements. But was justice really served? Roundup has been banned or restricted in over 30 countries, yet it's still widely used in the US, Latin America, and parts of Asia. In countries where it remains legal, its use is not just permitted, it's encouraged through agricultural subsidies, government partnerships, and corporate marketing that continues to frame it as indispensable for feeding the world. In rural communities, sprayers coat fields just meters from schools and homes with little to no public warning. Meanwhile, export crops treated with glyphosate often end up on supermarket shelves worldwide, crossing borders regardless of local bans. Regulators in some nations, heavily influenced by industry lobbyists, insist that the chemical is safe when used as directed, despite mounting independent research suggesting otherwise. Meanwhile, studies continue to show glyphosate in our food, water, and even in human breast milk. Its presence has been detected in cereals marketed to children, in rivers that supply major cities, and in the very rain that falls on our farmland. The contamination is so widespread that avoiding it entirely has become nearly impossible. How did we let this happen? How do corporations rewrite science? And most importantly, how do we stop it from happening again? This isn't just about Monsanto. It's about the system. A system where corporations fund their own research, where regulators are often industry insiders, and where profit outweighs public health. It's a network of influence that stretches from corporate boardrooms to government offices, blurring the line between watchdog and partner. When the same companies producing the chemicals are the ones paying for the safety studies, the outcome is rarely in doubt. Independent researchers often face funding cuts, professional attacks, or legal intimidation if their findings challenge the status quo. Trade groups act as enforcers, shaping legislation and public opinion with targeted campaigns. And for every scientist who speaks up, there are dozens more who stay silent, fearing the career-ending consequences of crossing the wrong people. This isn't regulation. It's a revolving door of mutual benefit, where short-term profits dictate long-term policy. Glyphosate was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a web of similar chemicals, each with its own carefully managed narrative, each benefiting from the same systemic blind spots. We live in a world where the truth has to fight to be heard, and often, it loses. But awareness is power. You can vote with your dollar, choose organic, support independent science, demand transparency. Every purchase you make sends a message to the farmers who grow our food, to the companies that supply it, and to the policymakers who set the rules. Subscribe for more deep dives into the truths corporations don't want you to know. Every interaction helps push this story into more feeds, reaching people who may never have heard it otherwise. Your comment could be the one that makes someone question what they've been told. Your share could help protect a family from harm. This fight needs all of us. Voices joined, stories told, and truths exposed. And remember, the real poison is ignorance.